John Prescott once said, "We're all middle class now." Well, that statement isn't totally correct, to be honest, as I might add that he was half correct, because in 2018 it was estimated that 50% of the world turned middle class, which technically means half of the world is a bourgeoisie, thus exploiting the poor. Hey, just kidding, but seriously, how did we get to this point is the actual question. In 1745, British writer James Bradshaw came up with this term for a pamphlet. Thus he started the war of controversy, or what the heck is a middle class. In today's world, term middle class does not have a strict requirement, as its usage has differed over times depending on who employed it. Generally, it is used to describe the middle fifth of the nation's income ladder, and if seen with a wider lens, then it includes everyone except the poorest 20% and the richest 20%. However, as seen in the history, the term itself had contradictory meanings, as Frederick Engels viewed people in this category to be in between peasantry and nobility. This social class first came to rise when the new bourgeoisie in France became tired of the shitty feudal system and decided to overthrow the nobility. Thus a new ruling class has entered the chat. While the modern use of this term goes back to 1913, where a statistician T.H.C. Stevenson identified middle class as the individuals who were in charge of significant human capital but were still under the elite class, who owned most of the financial capital, which means I am from the elite class as well, as I own 1,000 Doge coins, hey. After further classifications of different social classes, the middle class term began to refer to the petite bourgeoisie. These class of people were most affected by the boom-bust economic cycle, causing them to jump between different social classes. The modern term currently refers middle class to the population who are either in a white-collared or a professional job. But this terming creates a huge confusion, as the main characterization of being middle class was to own a small or medium-scale business. But such is not the case now. Maybe this is what self-delusion of being rich leads you to believe. Ah yes, my favorite shit, Marxism. Karl Marx's initial definition of the middle class was the bankers and merchants who in the Middle Ages were the financial intermediators between the feudal landlords and the peasantry. After the 18th century, with the fall of feudalism and rise of industrial revolution, the bourgeoisie came to hold the ownership of the means of production, which allowed them to employ and exploit the working class. In the 19th century, Marx differentiated between two types of bourgeoisie capitalist. One being the functional capitalist, who manages the means of productions, and other being the rentier capitalist, who gains income from renting property or through financial investment. This was the basis on which Marx set his political philosophy, where the rich exploits the poor through the means of production. Although the term bourgeois also refers to the consumerist style of lifestyle derived from the ownership of capital, but here we focus on the definition which closely relates to the middle class. In the 20th century, an American Marxist, Louis Corey, saw the middle class as the salaried managers and supervisory employees, but did not include the propertyless individuals. He viewed salaried employees as the potential new middle class, but that was just in the economic terms. Instead, he gave these people a new title, which was the peasants. Okay, I'm joking. The actual new title which he gave them was the new proletariat. I mean, what's the difference really? Just a fancier name. The thing is that in this modern world, the term middle class has become vague, as political societies have manipulated it to achieve political purposes. For example, when comparing wealth between countries, the media will tend to classify a higher proportion of population to be middle class, so the poor wouldn't really appear as poor. Well, Thomas Piketty caught on to these fishy methods and happily gave them a piece of his mind in his book Capital in the 21st Century. He writes, The statistical measures of income inequality that one finds in the writing of economists as well as in the public debate are all too often synthetic indices such as Gini coefficient, which mix very different things such as inequality with respect to labor and capital, so that it is impossible to distinguish clearly among the multiple dimensions of inequality and the various mechanisms at work. In February 2009, The Economist magazine announced that half of the world was middle class. How they calculated this was... I don't actually know, because who the fuck would pay for the subscription of The Economist? Anyways, how this statistic came to be was that people who were classified as a middle class still had 1/3 of their disposable income available to them after spending it on basic needs, which meant they were not property driven and had enough resources to increase their living standards. However, this number was from the middle class of the developing world, thus the living standards of the middle class from the developed country were still higher. The Economist magazine also wrote that in many emerging economies, the middle class had grown exponentially as international trade gave increased job opportunities to the people who were living on subsistence farming. This leads to an increase in economic productivity by multiple folds, thus pushing the wages up as well. We could see this rising pattern in China, occurring from 1990 to 2005, where the Chinese middle class grew by 47%. Now India tends to follow the same path as China, which means even more people entering the world of the middle class. The same report was given in the paper published by OECD in 2010, declaring that 1.8 billion people were now middle class. It is predicted that the numbers will exponentially grow until 2030. It is to reach 66% of the world population, which is expected to come from 56% of lower income groups crossing the threshold of being a middle class. So in conclusion, my point is that the future world lies in the hand of the modern bourgeoisie, which means the revolution of the proletariat is around the corner as well. So the only thing I wish is that I am alive to see the great revolution. Anyways, time to go back to my Marxist shrine and pray to Daddy Marx so he could bless my future career as a YouTuber. Also, Daddy Marx says that subscribe, like and hit the notification button.